The tale of Ashenputtel, also known as Cinderella. Once upon a time, nestled in a quiet village at the edge of an ancient, shadowy forest, there lived a girl named Ashenputtel. Her heart was as warm as the sun, and her spirit as bright as the stars. In her early years, life was full of joy and laughter, as her mother would sing lullabies under the twinkling sky and her father would tell stories of distant lands and heroic deeds. Ashenputtel grew in the embrace of these simple joys, each day spent in the warmth of her family's love. But as the seasons change, so do the lives of those who live through them. One cold autumn, Ashenputtel's world began to tremble. Her mother, who had always been her guiding light, fell gravely ill. The sickness came swiftly, stealing her mother's strength with each passing day. Soon her once vibrant eyes grew distant and clouded, and her once gentle hands, which had tenderly held Ashenputtel as a child, now lay still, unable to offer comfort. Ashenputtel watched in helpless despair as her mother faded away, a part of her heart slowly withering with each breath that left her mother's frail body. On the final day, when the pale sun barely pierced through the cold autumn clouds, Ashenputtel's mother called for her. Her voice, though faint and barely a whisper, still carried the echo of the love she had always offered. "My dear child," she whispered, her voice trembling, "the world will bring hardships beyond what you can imagine. But always remember, no matter the storm or the sorrow, hold on to your kindness. Keep faith in your heart, for the Lord will protect you when all else fails. Take this hazel branch and plant it on my grave. As you do, you will have a bond with me that will never break, and I will always be by your side." With tears streaming down her cheeks, Ashenputtel clutched the branch tightly, the last gift her mother could offer. She promised to honor those words, not knowing just how deeply they would be tested in the days to come.
After the death of her mother, Ashenputtel's father, overcome by grief and loneliness, remarried. He believed that a new wife would fill the empty space left by his beloved, but in reality, it only deepened the sorrow in Ashenputtel's heart. Her stepmother was a woman of pride, her beauty matched only by her cruelty. She had 2 daughters, who, like their mother, were filled with vanity, selfishness, and an unyielding sense of superiority. When they entered the home, it was as if the very air had turned cold. Their beauty was skin-deep, and their hearts were as dark as the winter nights. They sneered at Ashenputtel, calling her names and mocking her plain clothes, her dirty face, and her soft, humble manner. They made her feel as if she were nothing more than a servant, unworthy of their presence. The stepmother, too, took joy in the mistreatment of her new stepdaughter, ordering her to do the harshest work. "You're just a ragged little servant, nothing more," the older stepsister sneered, her eyes scanning Ashenputtel's worn clothes as if they were unworthy of her gaze. "You'll never fit in with us, Ashenputtel," the younger one taunted, her voice like a sharp blade. "You might as well stay by the hearth where you belong." Her father, blinded by his own grief, turned a blind eye to the cruelty unfolding before him. He did not see the heartache in Ashenputtel's eyes, nor the pain in her silent gaze as she worked tirelessly from dawn until dusk. Ashenputtel's once bright spirit was now dulled by the endless labor, her hands roughened and her face stained with soot. She was made to sleep by the hearth, the only warmth she received coming from the cold embers that never seemed to burn bright enough. Her once beautiful dresses were replaced with rags, and her joyful laughter was stifled by the harsh demands of her new life. But even in the midst of this pain, Ashenputtel never gave up on her mother's words. She still believed in the goodness of her heart and found solace in the simplest of things: a bird perched on the window ledge, the scent of the wind after rain, and the soft whisper of the wind in the trees outside. Every day, after the long hours of work, Ashenputtel would sneak away to the place where her mother was buried. She knelt beside her mother's grave and gently planted the hazel branch, just as her mother had asked. She watered it with her tears, speaking softly to the earth beneath her feet. "Dear mother," she whispered each time, "I feel so lost. I miss you so much. The world is so cruel, and I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Please help me." As if in response to her heartache, the hazel tree began to grow, first as a small sapling, then as a towering tree with shimmering branches that seemed to glow in the soft light of the setting sun. The white dove that had come to her so many times now perched on one of the branches, its eyes full of understanding and peace. The dove cooed softly, a sound like the softest lullaby, as Ashenputtel sat beneath the tree, finding solace in its quiet presence. It was as if the tree was an extension of her mother's spirit, watching over her, comforting her, offering her the strength to endure. One fateful morning, as Ashenputtel was sweeping the floors of the house, a royal messenger arrived with great news. The king, in celebration of his son's coming of age, was hosting a grand festival that would last for 3 days. The prince, so the messenger said, would choose his bride from among the young women of the kingdom. The stepsisters, filled with excitement, immediately began planning their attire. They rushed to the mirrors, admiring themselves and dreaming of the prince's attention. Ashenputtel, too, dreamed of going to the ball, if only for a single night, to escape the clutches of her oppressive life. Her heart fluttered at the thought of the music, the dancing, the joy. But her stepmother was cruel. "You? At the royal ball?" she sneered. "Stick to your duties, Ashenputtel. A filthy little servant has no place among royalty." Her stepsisters, their laughter echoing like knives, joined in the mockery, each gleefully calling her names and reminding her that she was nothing more than a ragged, dirty girl. To further humiliate Ashenputtel, her stepmother gave her an impossible task. She took a large bowl of lentils and dumped them into the ashes of the hearth. "Pick these lentils out from the ashes in 2 hours," she commanded, "and perhaps I will allow you to go to the ball. But do not expect it, for I know you will fail." Tears fell from Ashenputtel's eyes as she knelt by the hearth, desperately trying to separate the lentils from the ashes. Her hands were already sore, and her body was exhausted from the long days of servitude. Just as she felt the weight of despair closing in, the white dove appeared once more, fluttering down from the magical tree. The dove was joined by a flock of birds, each one delicate and swift. Together, they picked out every single lentil from the ashes, leaving behind only the cleanest, brightest grains. Ashenputtel gazed in awe at the birds as they worked so quickly, and with every grain removed, her heart began to lift. "Is this truly possible?" she whispered to herself. When the task was done, Ashenputtel hurried to the grave, her heart full of hope and longing. "Dear mother," she cried out, "I wish to go to the ball, even if it is just for 1 night. Please grant me this wish. I need to feel the joy once more." The hazel tree seemed to tremble, and from its branches, a soft golden light began to shine. The white dove fluttered down, and in its beak, it held a gown woven from moonlight and starlight, a gown of gold and silver. With the gown came delicate slippers made from purest silver, shining as if they were crafted by the very stars above. Ashenputtel gasped in wonder. "Is this for me?" she whispered. Her heart felt lighter than it ever had before. With trembling hands, Ashenputtel put on the gown. As she did, the soot and ash that had stained her skin vanished. Her hair, once tangled and matted, became smooth and shining, flowing down her back like a river of light. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself, no longer a cinder girl, but a radiant princess, her beauty shining from the inside out. As Ashenputtel entered the grand ballroom, the room fell silent. Every eye turned to her. The prince, whose heart had been filled with uncertainty, looked upon her with astonishment. He moved toward her, drawn by the light that radiated from her. "Who are you, my lady?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. Ashenputtel smiled softly, but she did not speak. She did not need to. Her grace spoke for her. The prince took her hand, and they danced, moving as though the music itself flowed through their veins. They twirled, lost in each other, as the hours slipped away unnoticed. But as the clock struck midnight, a sense of urgency gripped Ashenputtel's heart. She had to go, before the magic faded, before the night was over. As the midnight bell struck, panic surged through Ashenputtel's chest. She pulled her hand from the prince's and spun, her silver slippers shimmering as they caught the light, only to land on the marble floor with a soft echo. Her heart pounded in her chest as she raced toward the grand staircase, her feet light but urgent. The magic was fleeting, each step bringing her closer to the end of her fleeting joy. But as she reached the steps, the unthinkable happened. One of her silver slippers slipped off and became caught in the pitch that had been laid to prevent any hasty escapes. Ashenputtel, desperate not to be caught, tugged at the slipper, but it was stuck fast. Without another moment's hesitation, she had to leave it behind and flee into the night, vanishing as swiftly as she had arrived. The prince, heartbroken and desperate, stood at the top of the stairs, watching her disappear. His gaze stayed fixed on the empty space where she had once stood, a deep yearning in his eyes. He held the silver slipper tightly in his hand, the only clue to the identity of the mysterious maiden who had captivated him so thoroughly. The next day, as the kingdom awoke to the morning sun, the prince, consumed with the memory of Ashenputtel, made a vow to find her. He declared that he would marry the maiden whose foot fit the silver slipper, for he knew that she alone was the one his heart sought. The kingdom buzzed with excitement as messengers were sent out to every corner of the land. All the eligible young women were summoned, for the prince would not rest until he found the girl who had stolen his heart. Ashenputtel's stepsisters, eager to claim the prince for themselves, were beside themselves with joy. They already believed that the slipper would fit one of them, and they scrambled to prepare themselves, each trying to make their feet fit into the delicate shoe. But no matter how hard they tried, the slipper refused to fit. The prince arrived at Ashenputtel's home, where the stepsisters were eager to deceive him. The elder sister, determined to win the prince's affection, attempted to force her foot into the slipper. Her toes bled as she cut them off to try to fit them into the delicate shoe. "See," she cried, her voice full of triumph, but the white dove, perched high above the door, cried out in protest. "Look at the blood in the shoe. The maiden is not she." The prince recoiled, his face a mixture of disgust and pity. Still, he did not give up on his search. The younger stepsister, not to be outdone, tried the same trick, slicing off her heel in an attempt to force her foot into the slipper. But once again, the dove called out, revealing the truth. The prince, heart heavy with sadness, knew he could not accept the deception any longer. He turned to Ashenputtel, the quiet girl who had been so kind and humble, who had never tried to deceive him or anyone. Ashenputtel was called forward, the room still with anticipation. Her heart pounded as she stepped forward. The prince's eyes searched her face, full of both sorrow and longing. She gently lifted her foot, and the silver slipper slid onto her foot as though it had been made for her alone. It was as if the slipper had been waiting for her this entire time, destined to find its place. The prince's heart surged with joy as he saw the truth before him. He stepped forward and took her hand, his eyes locked on hers. "It is you," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder and relief. The gown of gold and silver appeared once again, the same gown she had worn the first night she met him, glowing with a soft, celestial light. It was as if time had stood still for them both. Ashenputtel, now freed from the chains of her past, stood before him as a princess in every sense, her heart pure and her spirit radiant. Days later, the kingdom rejoiced as Ashenputtel and the prince were wed in a grand ceremony. The people celebrated not just the union of two hearts, but the triumph of kindness over cruelty, of patience over suffering. Ashenputtel, once an unknown servant girl, now stood tall as the new queen. Her beauty was no longer just of the outer world but radiated from within, her kindness and grace shining through her every action. She was loved not only by her husband, but by all who knew her. On the day of their wedding, as the two stood hand in hand before the altar, the white dove appeared, flying gracefully above them. Its wings shimmered in the sunlight as it circled the couple, bringing with it a sense of peace and harmony. The dove had always been Ashenputtel's guide, and now it symbolized the protection and love that would surround her in her new life. But not all was as serene as the wedding. The stepsisters, full of envy and bitterness, tried to attend the wedding, hoping to share in the happiness. But the white dove and its flock were swift in their justice. As the sisters stepped toward the royal couple, The birds swooped down upon them, pecking out their eyes as punishment for their cruelty. The stepsisters were left to wander, blinded by their greed and malice, while Ashenputtel looked on with a heart full of sorrow but no regret. Though she had forgiven them long ago, Ashenputtel could not ignore the cruelty they had shown her. She knew that true forgiveness came from the heart, and though she had offered it, justice had its own way of finding those who had wronged others. And so, Ashenputtel and the prince lived a life filled with joy and peace. The kingdom prospered under their rule, and Ashenputtel's wisdom and kindness led them to greatness. The dove, a symbol of love and guidance, remained a faithful companion throughout their lives, ever watchful, ever present. Ashenputtel never forgot the lessons of her past, the suffering, the loneliness, and the injustice, but she also knew that through those trials, she had grown stronger, kinder, and wiser. She never allowed the cruelty of others to harden her heart, and as queen, she ruled with compassion, always remembering her mother's final words, to remain kind and good, for that was the true strength she carried. And thus they lived, together in love, in peace, and in joy, forever and always, under the watchful gaze of the stars and the protection of the dove that had watched over Ashenputtel from the very beginning.